Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Edgestone Studios. We're now looking towards the tracking room today because I've got in front of me the Polyevolver keyboard by Dave Smith Instruments. And I started a video series on this. I accidentally recorded for 50 minutes in mono. I posted it anyways because I'd spent the whole day on it, but that's coming down. It's being replaced by this series. I'm going to have multiple videos. And in this one, I'm going to cover what the Polyevolver is and how the controls work for sound generation. So let's get to it. This is the Dave Smith Instruments Polyevolver keyboard. So what's the Polyevolver? Well, in 2002, Dave Smith returned to designing synthesizers on his own with his own company, Dave Smith Instruments, which he newly formed, and he came out with the Evolver monophonic desktop unit, which is a digital analog hybrid synth with stereo filters and a stereo signal path for the oscillators plus more. And in 2005, he created both a rack and keyboard version of the Evolver by taking 4 of the modules and sticking them into a keyboard unit and a rack unit and allowing for a 4-voice polysynth or 4 individual monosynths or a combination in between, such as a single monosynth with a 3-voice polysynth. And that makes up the Polyevolver. And the cool thing about the Evolver series is if you have the rack, as I do, sitting right below my camera there, then you can trigger more than 4 notes by polychaining them. So how do you polychain? You take the MIDI out of the polychain into the MIDI in of the rack. You take the audio out of the keyboard into the audio in on the rack, and then it mixes with the audio coming out of the rack and blends to make a seamless 8-voice synthesizer. And if you have 2 of the racks, you can make a 12-voice synthesizer. Now, this particular Polyevolver used to belong to the Canadian rock band Metric. Metric is one of my all-time favorite bands. You should check them out if you don't know them. Okay, before I get into the sounds, let's look a little bit at the controls of the keyboard. We got a 61-key velocity-sensitive aftertouch capable keyboard. Pitch bend mod wheel, 2 octaves down, 2 octaves up. The voice programming here, 4 oscillators, digital and analog, 2 of each, left and right pair, stereo panning on each of those, hard left and right. So by default, 1 and 3 are hard left, 2 and 4 are hard right. A noise source, you can take an external signal in. There's a 2/4 pole low pass filter with envelopes and other features. There's the amplifier, which has its own envelope. There's an output pan to take it from stereo to mono and to the opposite stereo, so left is right and right is left. A high-pass filter. A tuned feedback circuit that feeds back from the feedback circuit into the low-pass filter and back through the amplifier again. There's a grunge level on that as well. There's a noise gate and distortion. It's got 1 setting for noise gate, and then beyond that it becomes distortion. There are 3 digital delays, each one with its own time, feedback, and amount, and a secondary feedback that takes the delay and feeds it back through the low-pass filter, the amplifier, the high-pass filter, the tune feedback, and all the way back to the delay. There is an output hack, which is something I liken to like a bit crusher. It's not quite the same. It does tend to add noise to the circuit. I haven't found the best use for it yet. There's a voice volume for adjusting the voice level towards other voices in the synth. There's a third envelope that's fully assignable to whatever you want to assign it to. You have 4 different LFOs, each with their own shape. Each can go to a different destination. You have 4 different independent modulators that could be anything from the LFOs again, some of the envelopes, other settings, the sequencer, that can each go to their own destination and have their own amounts, as well as fixed modulators, such as your mod wheel, your pressure sensitivity. There could be a breath controller, the velocity sensitivity or the velocity could be a modulator. A foot controller can be a modulator, and the external input can trigger modulation either based on its peak or causing the envelope to follow the external input. You also have a fully capable 4-lane 16-step sequencer. So each of these is a single 16-step sequencer. Each of those sequencers can be assigned to a given destination and control, say, pitch, could control cutoff, could control the speed of the actual sequencer itself. As well, the sequencer can be one of the modulators, so each of those 4 sequencers could be modulating more than one thing. So all 4 could potentially be modulating 2 things, or one of them could be modulating 5 things and the other 3 just one thing. The routing potentials and modulation potentials in this synth are insane. Okay, so on bank 4, number 128, I've made an init program. I've set it back in global settings to be polychain off, so I'm not controlling the rack at this point in time. And what you'll hear is a saw wave coming from oscillator 1. You'll notice it's only on the left. That's because oscillator 1 is left panned. There is a feature to change that, which is output pan here. So you see on the blurry screen there, it's left and right panned. A little bit more centered, a little bit more centered, and then eventually it'll turn to mono. The other shapes we have, triangle, saw triangle, and then various pulse widths of a pulse wave from 0. Notice the digital stepping as it changes values there, but it is an analog oscillator. And when you get to 50, you're at a square wave, and then as you go higher, it's a pulse wave with the opposite polarity. Okay, let's put the panning back. If we go to analog oscillator 2 and turn up its level, make sure it's also on a sawtooth wave. Now we're getting both playing, so it's sounding somewhat mono, but really it's stereo. I'll turn that off. Same settings on that. There's a glide setting as well. I won't bother with that. You know how glide works. Okay, digital oscillator. Number 3 is a digital oscillator. If we go to the first shape is a digital sine wave. Again, fine frequency, coarse frequency, and then multiple different waveforms you can choose from. Some of them more complex with more harmonics. There's 128 digital shapes for the digital oscillators. Some of them derived from the Prophet VS. They aren't necessarily in the same numbered places as on the Prophet VS, is my understanding. I've never heard or played a Prophet VS in person, so it doesn't mean that much to me. The digital oscillators have 3 more controls here that are only available to the digital oscillators. That's an FM frequency modulation. So in the case of oscillator 3, when you adjust the FM, the frequency of modulator 4 and its shape are going to modulate the shape and frequency of modulator 3. Same with the ring mod. And there's also something called shape sequencer. So let's try this FM modulation. So there's oscillator 4 modulating 3. If we change the pitch of 4, we're not listening to 4, just the modulation. We can get some interesting results. We can kind of tune those. So without, whoops, without. Ring modulation, similar thing. Whoops, let's change that. Let's change the frequency of 4. You notice it's fairly harsh sounding. That's one of the things I like about the synth is it's very grungy. It's very dirty and gritty. It's great for bass lines to cut through, beat sounds, pads that you want to be bright. You can filter them and make them less bright, but it really does well at the grungy sort of sounds. The shape sequencer basically allows you to sequence what shape is being played by the oscillator using a sequencer. Now, I wasn't going to get into the sequencer here, but let's do a quick thing here, and let's see sequencer 1 here. We can turn off its destination so that it's not going anywhere. It's still making a sound though. And we set sequencer 1 to play the shape of digital oscillator 3, and if we start switching these things around, now we've got the let's make sure the shape that's being played by this by the sequencer is changing every single step of the sequence. If I go to a slower speed, oops. Now, these other sequences might be playing as well. No, they aren't. Okay. So that's shape sequence. Let's go back to the analog filter, or analog oscillators. Okay, there's a noise source. Turn off the analog oscillators. So you've got noise. You've got external in. Now I have connected MIDI out, not the poly chain out, but the MIDI out into my Yamaha TX802. And that's currently plugged into the stereo audio in. So as I turn this up, we should be triggering the 802 and hearing digital patches from the Yamaha tone generator. So now you could mix that with oscillators. So there I've got, well, 4 in that case, but let's turn up a couple more. I've got 5 different oscillators going. I've got the 4, 2 digital, 2 analog, noise, and the Yamaha coming in as well. Well, let's leave that for the moment. Okay, low pass filter, typical. Some resonance. The 4-pole is self-oscillating. So as I bring that resonance up, it'll start getting pretty gnarly. And that's not even all the way. There's all the way. 2-pole is not self-oscillating, but it does have resonance. So You got a regular envelope generator for this, so if you put a little bit of envelope amount, turn up the sustain, put a bit of attack, turn down the filter. You start getting some synthy-like sounds. Hear it more with the 4-pole. There's an amplifier volume, or level, I should say. If you turn that up, it basically just turns on the amplifier without using the envelope. So this could be useful with maybe modulation sources, or just to make a drone like this and then get a sequence going. But normally, I just leave that off. If you turn up a bit of envelope amount for the amplifier, you can use the envelope for the amplifier. Nothing to start. Turn up the sustain, or even just say some decay. A little bit of release. This could be non-velocity sensitive by turning velocity to 0, or fully velocity sensitive. Same as the filter, you can crank the velocity sensitivity so it I tend to leave it low. The left-right split takes the filter and shifts it from the left to the right. Remember, there's the stereo filters that are identical when you set your... the controls set each of the stereo paths the same, but as you change the left-right split, it shifts the filter more to the right than from the left. So you get this movement in the stereo spectrum of the filter. Okay, high-pass filter is typical. Takes up the low frequencies. This could be pre or post for the external source. So if we turn off all the levels of the oscillators, so we only have the external. That's the high-pass filter after it's passed through the filter. And if you do post, you're filtering the high-pass filter before it goes through the low-pass filter. It would come into play if you're doing other things to the signal, or if you have a very bassy signal and you want to cut out some bass that's coming in the external in, for example. Okay, the tuned feedback will feedback a tuned signal through the low-pass filter. Now, I will point out that at this point in time, after we pass the amplifier, everything's been converted back to a digital signal. So it's a digital high-pass filter, digital tuned feedback, digital distortion, digital delay, and the digital output hack. And there's routing back that goes back through a digital analog converter back through the analog portion. So you've got analog oscillators, digital oscillators, a converter for the digital to become analog. This section's analog, then it goes back to digital until the end, then it comes back analog. It's a true digital analog hybrid because it passes through the digital analog conversion multiple times if you're using things like the feedback or the delay circuit. So with tuned feedback, it depends on the low-pass filter settings, but as you turn up the tuned feedback, so that can get pretty gnarly as you bring up the feedback. The distortion circuit starts at 0, no distortion, goes to a noise gate which will cut out some of this output hack sound. So nice and quiet. turn it off, there's all that noise from that output hack. So you tend to use the noise gate when you're using the output hack feature. Turn that off for a sec. The distortion, once it gets to 1, you start hearing it kick in here. Let's get 1. So this is a digitally created distortion, but it sounds very nice. Adds a bunch of richness to the sound. It can get pretty wild. I'll turn the volume down. There's max distortion. You see what I mean? Pretty gnarly. It's little amounts on this synth. But I love that distortion. I add it to almost all my sounds. The delay circuits, so if you turn up the amount, turn the time up to very high. And then you can get some feedback. That was delay number 3. I just happened to be on. If I go to number 2, I could do a similar thing. Turn up the amount for 2. Turn up the time for 2 so we can actually hear it. I find the short delays are so short, they're almost hard to hear. So there's without delay 2 as I bring it up. You can really hear it going quickly in the background there. And you can get self-oscillating delay. As well. So you could have multiple delays. And then another feature of the delays, let's turn off 3 and just go back to 2, is that you can feed that delay back through the low-pass filter. And if you feed enough of it, you get the frequency open enough, and get enough feedback. Maybe it was the amount that again, you get this out of control noise source that can be very musical, but get a little bit away from you at times. A couple things I didn't point out. There's a clip light here and a clip light here. This clip lights happen right where the digital to analog conversions happen. So you can keep an eye on that as you're programming. If you start seeing clipping, you know that you need to bring down the level, say, coming out of the amplifier, or the level of the feedback coming back into the low-pass filter. And I showed you the output hack briefly, but basically, let's take a cleaner sounding sound here. Let's go with saw triangle. Without any noise. Get some level. And turn off all this delay. The output hack is subtle at first, depends on the sound source going into it. But now you can hear it's like digitally destroying the signal and adding noise to it. I'm not quite sure exactly what it does. It does something though. Okay, the last thing we have to cover for sound generation are the other modulation sources. So we have a third envelope. This could be assigned to all sorts of destinations. You can see a few of them in the little window there. Could be the frequency modulation, could be the low pass filter, etc. So let's say, for example, we assign it to all the oscillators frequencies. It could have velocity associated with it. And it could be delayed so it doesn't happen right away. So that third envelope could be very useful. You have your traditional LFOs, 4 of them. 4 of them, that's amazing. They can be assigned to various things as well, such as, whoops, that's the frequency. We want to go destination. Oscillator frequencies for all 4, all of them, all their levels, the noise level. Oscillator 1's pulse width, so you can get your traditional pulse width modulation here. So let's put these on pulse. Maybe right close to the middle. Turn up their levels. And let's get a nice slow oscillator here. And we could have a triangle shape, saw, square. And this can also go into audio rates. And you got 4 of those to assign to multiple things. On top of that, you have independent modulators that aren't necessarily LFOs, but they could be LFOs. So the source for those oscillators could be the sequencers, the LFOs, for those modulators, sequencers, the LFOs, the filter envelope, the VCO envelope. Envelope 3 could assign to another thing here. Your external in, the pitch bend, the mod wheel, pressure, MIDI, velocity, all those types of things. So let's say we take LFO 1. It's going to all frequencies. And if we set this destination also to noise, we could get noise varying. Well, so one oscillator could be assigned to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different places if you wanted. Or you can mix and match, which we'll get into in another video. The rest of the synthesizer has to do with the sequencer and then the various parameters for going into how things are being triggered, gating the sequencer, resetting the sequencer, playing from the keyboard only, playing from the sequencer only, settings for MIDI and etc. There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to leave that for a second video where I cover more of the features and start making some sounds. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview of the controls on the Polyevolver. The next video I plan to do is one on sound creation. I want to go through and make a variety of sounds, some pads, some evolving textures, maybe some leads, some drum sounds. I probably won't touch the sequencer too much on that unless I'm going to use it for the evolving textures. I'll try and stick to the modulations. And then I'll go on to a third one where I get further into the sequencer because it's a bit of a pain. So it kind of needs its own video. So if you've got suggestions for sounds you want me to try and create, I will work on those as I work on the next video that I have not yet filmed. If you leave them in the comments. If you leave them in the comments after I film that video, I will not work on them. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching. Hope you found it interesting. I try and make it enjoyable. I just sort of ramble on, talk about stuff, quick edits, no super fancy production here, just as basic as I can get and get the job done. Thanks for watching. See you next time.